Hey guys, Joshua from Vietnam coming at you to wish you a good morning. Today I'm going to be talking about another experiment that I'd really like to build and do myself, only this time it's not an experiment of my own design. I'd like to recreate Samuel Rowbotham's Bedford level experiment. If you've been in this community of Geodesy for long, you've definitely heard of Samuel Rowbotham. He's very famous for the book that he wrote in 1881 called Earth, Not a Globe, or Zetetic Astronomy. So let's go over the scientific method review like we start all of our videos out with. We know that objects are visible beyond 3 miles, but current geometry says they shouldn't be. So we'd like to know if the Earth does in fact curve 24 feet in 6 miles. That's about 7 meters and 9.5 kilometers. The hypothesis is the surface of the 6 miles should be without a consistent curve. And the design is we're going to find a 6-mile stretch of unbending water and repeat the first 4 experiments in Rowbotham's book. The results are obviously expected to be consistent with Rowbotham's. So if you guys don't know who Samuel Rowbotham is, I definitely encourage you to take a look at his book. I'm going to be reading word for word the first 4 experiments of this video out there. So if you're already familiar with it, then maybe just end it here and wait for part 2, which is when I'll be going to the sites that I want to do this test and actually beginning the survey. At the end, I've got some information about the equipment again if you're interested in that. So if you know of Eric Dubay, who it seems most people know, almost everything he said in his video is either a direct quote from Samuel Rowbotham's Zetetic Astronomy or a direct quote from David Scott's Terra Firma, the Earth Not a Planet. I would encourage everyone to watch less YouTube videos and go out and find independent sources more. Eric Dubay is not some genius who figured out these 200 proofs. He even ripped anecdotal stories off of David Scott when he talks to you about how he interacted with his teacher. It's all nonsense. We should stay away from men like this. This is the very beginning in the introduction of Samuel Rowbotham's book. I'm about to just go into the first 4 chapters and read them word for word with you, but to understand what he means by zetetic astronomy, it's important to read this first introduction. So the term zetetic is derived from the Greek verb zeteo, which means to search or examine, to proceed only by inquiry, to take nothing for granted, but to trace phenomena to their immediate and demonstrable causes. It is here used in contradistinction from the word theoretic, the meaning of which is speculative, imaginary, not tangible, scheming, but not proving. And now we're going to move directly into Chapter 2 of Zetetic Astronomy, experiments demonstrating the true form of standing water and proving the Earth to be a flat plane. If the Earth is a globe and it is 25,000 English statute miles in circumference, the surface of all standing water must have a certain degree of convexity. Every part must be an arc of a circle. From the summit of any such arc, there will exist a curvature or declination of 8 inches in the first statute mile. In the second mile, the fall will be 32 inches. In the third mile, 72 inches, or 6 feet, as shown in the diagram on the next slide. Let the distance from T to figure 1 in the top left represent 1 mile, and the fall from 1 to A, 8 inches. Then the fall from 2 to B will be 32 inches, and from 3 to C, 72 inches. In every mile after the first curve, the curvature downwards from the point T increases as the square of the distance multiplied by 8 inches. The rule, however, requires to be modified after the first 1,000 miles. The following table will show at a glance the amount of curvature in round numbers in different distances up to 100 miles. It will be seen by this table on the right-hand side of the slide that after the first few miles, the curvature would be so great that no difficulty could exist in detecting either its actual existence or its proportion. Experiments made on the seashore have been objected to on account of their constantly changing altitude of the surface of the water, and of the existence of banks and channels which provide a crowding of the waters, as well as currents and other irregularities. Standing water has therefore been selected, and many important experiments have been made, the most simple of which are the following. In the county of Cambridge, there is an artificial river or canal called the Old Bedford. It is upwards of 20 miles in length, and except at the part referred to on page 16, passes in a straight line through the part of the fens called the Bedford Level. The water is nearly stationary, often completely so, and throughout its entire length has no interruption from locks or water gates of any kind. so that it is, in every respect, well adapted for ascertaining whether any or what amount of convexity really exists. A boat with a flag staff, the top of the flag 5 feet above the surface of the water, was directed to sail from a place called Welsh's Dam, a well-known ferry passage, to another called Welney Bridge. These 2 points are 6 statute miles apart. The author, with a good telescope, went into the water and with the eye about 8 inches above the surface, observed the receding boat during the whole period required to sail to Welney Bridge. The flag and the boat were distinctly visible throughout the whole distance. There could be no mistake as to the distance passed over, as the man in charge of the boat had instructions to lift one of his oars at the top of the ark the moment he reached the bridge. The experiment commenced about 3 o'clock in the afternoon of a summer's day, and the sun was shining brightly and nearly behind or against the boat during the whole of its passage. Every necessary condition had been fulfilled, and the result was to the last degree definite and satisfactory. The conclusion was unavoidable that the surface of the water for a length of 6 miles did not to any appreciable extent decline or curvate downwards from the line of sight. But if the earth is a globe, the surface of 6 miles length of water would have been 6 feet higher in the center than at the two extremities, as shown in the diagram in figure 2 above. But as the telescope was only 8 inches above the water, the highest point on the surface would have been at 1 mile from the place of observation, and below this point the surface of the water at the end of the remaining 5 miles would have been 16 feet. Let AB represent the arc of water 6 miles long, and AC the line of sight. The point of contact with the arc would be at T, a distance of 1 mile from the observer at A. From T to the bridge at B would be 5 miles, and the curvature from T to B would be 16 feet 8 inches. The top of the flag on the boat, which was 5 feet high, would have been 11 feet 8 inches below the horizon T, and altogether out of sight. Such a condition was not observed, but the following diagram, figure 3, exhibits the true state of the case. A, B, the line of sight equidistant from or parallel from the surface of the water throughout the whole distance of 6 miles, from which it is concluded that the surface of standing water is not convex, but horizontal. Experiment 2. Along the edge of the water in the same canal, 6 flags were placed 1 statute mile from each other, and so arranged that the top of each flag was 5 feet above the surface. Close to the last flag in the series, a long staff was fixed, bearing a flag 3 feet square, and the top of which was 8 feet above the surface of the water, the bottom being in a line with the tops of the other and intervening flags, as shown in the following diagram in the bottom of the right-hand screen, figure 4. On looking with a good telescope over and along the flags from A to B, the line of sight fell on the lower part of the larger flag at B. The altitude of the point B above the water at D was 5 feet, and the altitude of the telescope at A above the water at C was 5 feet, and each intervening flag had the same altitude. Hence the surface of the water, CD, was equidistant from the line of sight AB, and as AB was a right line, CD, being parallel, was also a right line. Or, in other words, the surface of the water, CD, was for 6 miles absolutely horizontal. If the earth is a globe, the series of flags in the last experiment would have had the form and produced the results represented in the diagram in your top right of your screen, figure 5. The water curvating from C to D, each flag would have been a given amount below the line AB. The first and second flags would have determined the direction of the line of sight from A to B, and the third flag would have been 8 inches below the second, the fourth flag 32 inches, the fifth 6 feet, the sixth 10 feet 8 inches, and the seventh 16 feet 8 inches. But the top of the last and largest flag, being 3 feet higher than the smaller ones, would have been 13 feet and 8 inches below the line of sight at the point B. The rotundity of the earth would necessitate the above conditions, but as they cannot be found to exist, the doctrine must be pronounced as only a simple theory, having no foundation in fact. A pure invention of misdirected genius, splendid in its comprehensiveness and bearing upon natural phenomena, but nevertheless mathematical and logical necessities compel its denunciation as an absolute falsehood. The above-named experiments were first made by the author in the summer of 1838, but in the previous winter season, when the water in the old Bedford Canal was frozen, he had often, when lying on the ice, with a good telescope, observed persons skating and sliding at known distances of from 4 to 8 miles. He lived for 9 successive months within 100 yards of the canal in a temporary wooden building, and had many opportunities of making and repeating observations and experiments, which it would only be tedious to enumerate, as they all involved the same principle and led to the same conclusions as those already discussed. It may, however, interest the reader to relate an instance which occurred unexpectedly, and which created such a degree of confusion that he was repeatedly tempted to destroy the many memoranda he had previously made up. Up to this time, all his observations had been made in the direction of Welney, the bridge there affording a substantial signal point, but on one occasion, a gentleman who resided within a few miles of the temporary residence, already alluded to, and with whom conversations and discussions had been repeatedly held, insisted upon the telescope being directed upon a barge sailing in an opposite direction to that previously selected. Watching the slowly receding vessel for a considerable time, it suddenly disappeared altogether. The gentleman co-observer cried out in a tone of exultation, "Now, sir, are you satisfied that water declines?" It was almost impossible to say anything in reply. All that could be done was to gaze in mute astonishment in the direction of the lost vessel, compelled to listen to the jeers and taunts of the apparent victor. After thus wonderingly gazing for a considerable time with still greater astonishment, the vessel was seen to suddenly come again into view. Obliged to admit the reappearance of the vessel, neither of us could fairly claim the victory, as both were puzzled and equally in an experimental fix. This condition of the question at issue lasted for several days, when one evening, conversing with a gunner, a shooter of wild fowl, upon the strange appearance referred to, he laughingly undertook to explain the whole affair. He said that at several miles away beyond the ferry house, the canal made a sudden bend in the shape of a letter V when lying horizontally, and that the vessel disappeared on account of its entering into one side of the triangle, and reappeared after passing down the other side and entering the usual line of the canal. After a time, a large map of the canal was found in a neighboring town, Wisbeach, and the gunner's statement fully verified. The following diagram will explain this strange and for a time confounding phenomena. A, representing the position of the observer, and the arrows in the direction of the vessel, which on arriving at the point B suddenly entered the reach B, C, and disappeared, but which on arriving at C became again visible, and remained so after entering and sailing along the canal from C to D. The ferry house and several trees which stood on the side of the canal between the observer and the bend had prevented the vessel being seen during the time it was passing from B to C. Thus the mystery was cleared away, the author was the real victor, and the gentleman referred to, with many others of the neighborhood, subsequently avowed their conviction that the water in the Bedford level at the least was horizontal, and they therefore could not see how the earth could possibly be a globe. A good theodolite was placed on the northern bank of the canal, midway between Welney Bridge and the old Bedford Bridge, which are fully 6 miles apart, as shown in diagram below, figure 7. The line of sight from the leveled theodolite fell upon the points B at an altitude, making allowance for refraction equal to that of the observer at T. Now the points B being 3 miles from T, would have been the square of 3, or 9 times 8 inches, or 6 feet, below the line of sight, C, as seen in the above diagram, figure 8. On several occasions, the 6 miles of water in the old Bedford Canal had been surveyed by the so-called forward process of leveling, which consisted in simply taking a sight of, say, 20 chains or 440 yards, noting that the point observed, moving the instrument forward to the point, and taking a second observation, again moving the instrument forward, again observing 20 chains in advance, and so on throughout the whole distance. By this process, without making allowance for convexity, the surface of the water was found to be perfectly horizontal. But when the result was made known to several surveyors, it was contended that when the theodolite is leveled, it is placed at right angles to the Earth radius, the line of sight from it being a tangent, and that when it is removed 20 chains forward and again leveled, it becomes a second and different tangent, and that indeed every new position is really a fresh tangent as shown to the side in figure 9. T1, T2, and T3, representing the theodolite leveled at 3 different positions and therefore square to the radii 1, 2, and 3, hence leveling forward in this way, although making no allowance for rotundity, the rotundity or allowance for it is involved in the process. This is a very ingenious and plausible argument by which the visible contradiction between the theory of rotundity and the results of practical leveling is explained, and many excellent mathematicians and geodesists have been deceived by it. Logically, however, it will be seen that it is not a proof of rotundity. It is only an explanation or reconciliation of results with the supposition of rotundity, but does not prove it to exist. The following modification was therefore adopted by the author in order that the convexity, if it existed, might be demonstrated. The theodolite was placed at the point A in figure 10 to the right and leveled. It was then directed over the flagstaff B to the crossstaff C. The instrument A, the flagstaff B, and the crossstaff C having the exact same altitude. The result of this peculiar or modified survey, which has been several times repeated, was that the line of sight and the surface of the water ran parallel to each other, and as the line of sight was, in this instance, a right line, the surface of the water for 6 miles was demonstrably horizontal. This mode of forward leveling is so very exact and satisfactory that the following further illustration may be given with advantage. In figure 11 to our right, let A, B, C represent the first position, respectively, of the theodolite, flagstaff, and crossstaff. B, C, D, the second position, C, D, E, the third position, and D, E, F, the fourth position, similarly repeated throughout the whole distance surveyed. The remarks, thus made in reference to simple forward leveling, apply with equal force to what is called by surveyors the back and foresight process, which consists in reading backwards a distance equal to the distance read forwards. This plan is adopted to obviate the necessity for calculating or allowing for the Earth's supposed convexity. It applies, however, just the same in practice, whether the base or datum line is horizontal or convex, but as it has been proved to be the former, it is evident that the back and foresight leveling is a waste of time and skill and altogether unnecessary. Forward leveling over intervening test. Our guide staves, as explained by the diagram below in figure 11, is far superior to any of the ordinary methods and has the great advantage of being purely practical and not involving any theoretical considerations. Its adoption along the banks of any canal or lake or standing water of any kind, or even along the shore of an open sea, will demonstrate to the fullest satisfaction of any practical surveyor that the surface of all water is in fact horizontal. So that concludes the first 4 experiments of Samuel Rowbotham's. I'm going to go through the remainder of my test. It's a really rainy day in Saigon, so I'm only going to get to do part 1. Part 2, hopefully I'll do tomorrow, where I actually get to go out and survey sites that I want to do it. So I'll show you soon where I want to do this test. We're going to look at the assumptions because we always do that. And then for my few listeners out there, if anyone has any comments or they want something else tested or something changed, now's the time to let me know because I'm still in the planning stage and I'll take a look at the equipment that I'm going to need. So can I do it in Saigon? I was going all over my map here and I found this. I have no idea what it is, but it registers 6.88 miles in a perfectly straight line. There's no Google Street View over there, so I'm really at an absolute loss of what it's going to look like. But I see that there's another one very close to it as well. So I'm going to take my bike out there, get my GoPro on my helmet. I'm really excited. I get to show you guys a little bit about where I live in this crazy world. And I'm going to go do site surveys tomorrow. I'll bring my P900, I'll bring my tripod, and I'll see if they're adequate. If they're not, I'm not going to give up on the project. I'm going to go to a beach town. It's an island called Vung Tau, and I know that the shore there is completely open, and I'll figure out how to do it. So on the assumptions made, the very point of this experiment is that it's zetetic, which should be that there are no assumptions needed. In reality, the real assumption here is that if the Earth is a sphere with a circumference of 25,000 English statute miles, then that curvature should be observable and the shape of the Earth should be observable. I believe that's my only assumption in this experiment. Correct me if I'm wrong. So I'm going to make a couple modifications to this experiment. Number one, I want hydrometers and thermometers everywhere. I don't want anyone to be able to claim that I'm observing things because of refraction. I want to be able to see the density of the air, and I want to see the temperature of the air so I can actually calculate refraction. I would like to place them every half mile, so at least 12, but maybe even more. And then I probably want one guy holding one on a motorbike so we can drive up and down and test it all the way through. I'd also like to add a laser to the test, shine a laser through the completion of the canal, see how that works. And like I said, send a motorbike on the distance. If I can do this while the laser is on, I probably need to talk to the Vietnamese authorities. But if I could send a rider for 5 minutes while the laser's on, it would be wild to record that. And my most important thing, and the difference between me and Samuel Robotham, is I am going to be recording everything. All right, what equipment do I need? I don't think I'm going to need a telescope. Instead, I'll be using my Coolpix P900 for the long distance observations. I think it's up for the task. I really, really do. It's got an 83 zoom and a 2000 millimeter lens, so it's quite an impressive long distance camera with its telephoto lens there. I need to read a little bit more about this, but I'm under the impression that cheap Chinese $5 thermometers and hydrometers will be fine as long as I have enough of them. Obviously, if I did one reading on them, that'd be bad, but if I have 10 all reading within the same, I feel like I'm okay. I can also do things in my apartment to calibrate them. I need a theodolite if I'm going to do this. So I don't know very much about theodolites yet. I've used them before, but I've never had to purchase one. I just used the one that Xerox handed me and said, go do your stuff, kid. So I'm now reading about them and looking at data sheets for the first time. There's quite a wide range that I'm able to get here in Vietnam, so we'll take a look at that. And yeah, so in the parameter of this test, what is the functional difference between a $500 and a $3,000 theodolite? I don't know. I have no idea how expensive the one I've used is. But these are the ones that I see in Vietnam. They're called Makin Vase here. And you can see they start around 10,400,000 dong, which is a little bit under 500 bucks, and they go up to 70 million dong, which is under $4,000. So I need to pull data sheets for all these and see what's up. I really hope the 10 million dong one will work. That's a South DT05, in case anyone's just listening. And as I've told you last time, the purpose of my channel is for me to document the experiments that I want to do and then document my results. I'm setting goals for myself. I'm also reaching out to people who are interested in assisting me on these experiments. I know most of you probably aren't in Vietnam, so you can't really come and be a body for me, but maybe you know a little bit more about some of the math that I'm doing. Maybe you know a little bit more about theodolites than I do. So I would really, really encourage and welcome criticism on my experiment, how I can make it better, stronger, more robust. This looks like a really cheap experiment altogether. Now the classes are picking back up and I'm teaching again. I should be able to get the money for the theodolite rather soon. It looks like under $1,500. Under $1,500, I can get anything. I obviously don't need accommodations if I'm going to the canals that I showed near Saigon. That's only about 30 minutes from my house. But if I've got to go to the beach town, then obviously I need a hotel. So we're looking under $1,500. I should be able to do all this. And I'm really excited. One, because at the end of it, I get a theodolite. And who doesn't want a theodolite? How can I be the sincere geodeser if I don't have a theodolite? So thank you guys all so very much for watching. Stay tuned for part 2, which hopefully will come out tomorrow, where I go to those canals and we do a site survey. Thank you guys very much and have a wonderful day.